I want to tell you something about quiet, not silence. Silence is the absence of sound, and that's easy enough to find. Quiet is different. Quiet is something that fills a room. It has weight, it has temperature. And when my dog lies down in the middle of a situation that should, by all rights, be loud, the quiet he makes is the heaviest thing in the room. His name is Patch. He's a border collie, 9 years old, 38 pounds, black and white with one brown eye and one that's ice blue. He's got a notch in his left ear from a barbed wire fence on my brother's ranch in Montana, and he sleeps with his chin on my boot. He has never, in 9 years, barked at a stranger. He doesn't need to. My name is Cal Mercer. I'm 63 years old. I spent 22 years in the United Nations Interstellar Liaison Corps, the fancy name they gave the branch that dealt with first contact, species integration, and the long, tedious business of making sure human beings and alien civilizations didn't accidentally destroy each other over a mispronounced greeting or a handshake that looked like a threat. I retired 4 years ago with a bad knee, a pension, and Patch. The knee aches when it rains. The pension covers groceries. Patch covers everything else. I wasn't supposed to be at the Tianmar summit. The Tianmar neutral station sits in a Lagrange pocket between two disputed systems, the Vetha Expanse, claimed by the Orth Dominion, and the Kale Traverse, held by the Sulani Compact. For 11 months, those two powers had been escalating. Warships on the border, civilian convoys diverted, diplomatic channels frozen solid, the kind of slow, grinding friction that doesn't make headlines until it becomes a war, and by then it's too late for headlines to matter. The summit was Earth's idea. We brokered the neutral ground, provided the station security framework, and issued invitations to 14 spacefaring delegations, the two principals and 12 observer states, with trade interests in the corridor. Earth's role was mediator. Our ambassador, a sharp woman named Vasquez, had spent 6 months laying the groundwork. She knew every faction's pressure points, every delegation's bottom line, every cultural tripwire that could collapse the talks in a heartbeat. Then Vasquez broke her hip stepping off a shuttle ramp on Ganymede, 3 days before the summit opened. Her deputy, a career diplomat named Okonkwo, was good. He was also 31, had never handled a multi-species standoff, and had a tendency to smile when he was nervous, which, in about 9 of the 14 cultures attending, was a threat display, baring teeth. The universal "I am about to bite you" signal that humans decided, somewhere in their evolutionary history, to repurpose as friendliness. The galaxy has never fully forgiven us for that. So someone at headquarters pulled my file. Retired, experienced, available on short notice. And this was the part they didn't say aloud, but everyone understood. Expendable enough that if the summit collapsed, the real diplomats could blame the old man they dragged out of retirement. They called me on a Tuesday. I was in my kitchen in Bozeman, scrambling in eggs. Patch was under the table, waiting for the part where I pretend to drop a piece of toast. Cal, we need you at Tianmar. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Advisory role, you'd be the cultural liaison, not the lead. Okonkwo runs the room. You just keep him from stepping on any tails. Figuratively and literally. I'm retired, Jess, I know. We're asking anyway. I looked down at Patch. He looked up at me with his one blue eye. I'm bringing my dog, I said. There was a pause. Cal, this is a diplomatic summit, nada. I'm bringing my dog, or I'm finishing my eggs. Pick one. They picked Patch. The transport docked at Tianmar Station on a Thursday morning station time. The trip out had taken 9 days, 3 through conventional transit lanes, 6 through the Kale Approach Corridor, which was technically Sulani-controlled space, and required clearance from their border authority. They were polite about it. The Sulani are always polite. It's a survival strategy for a herbivore species in a galaxy full of teeth. The station was a standard UN framework neutral facility, rotating habitat ring, central dock spire, conference levels on the lower decks. It was designed to be aggressively inoffensive. Soft lighting, rounded corridors, ambient temperature set to the median comfort range of all 14 attending species, which meant it was slightly too warm for humans and slightly too cold for everyone else. The air tasted flat, recycled and filtered through 14 different atmospheric preferences, scrubbed clean until it was as neutral as distilled water. Diplomacy condensed into a breathable medium. I walked off the shuttle with Patch on a leather lead at my left side. He was calm. He's always calm. 9 years of traveling with me, through spaceports and shuttle transfers and customs checkpoints, and the particular kind of institutional boredom that defines interstellar transit. He'd learned long ago that new places were just old places with different smells. And Tianmar Station smelled like all of them and none of them, which Patch accepted with the equanimity of a dog who has long since stopped being surprised by the universe. The dock officer, a human, Mid-30s, with the slightly glazed look of someone who'd been processing arrivals for 6 hours, checked my credentials, and then looked at Patch. Is that a dog? Border Collie. On a diplomatic station. He's credentialed. The officer looked at her screen. Looked at Patch. Looked at me. There's a notation here that says companion animal, cultural attaché. Is that real? It's as real as anything else in diplomacy. She stamped us through. Patch walked beside me into the corridor, his nails clicking softly on the composite decking. The first alien we encountered was a Sulani attaché, tall, thin-limbed, with pale silver skin and large, dark eyes that reflected light like wet stone. The Sulani are a herbivore-descended species. Their ancestors were herd animals on a temperate world with very few apex predators and a lot of open grassland. They are, by galactic standards, gentle. They are also, by galactic standards, extremely nervous. 8 million years of checking the horizon for things that wanted to eat you will do that. The attaché saw Patch and froze, not a casual freeze, a prey animal freeze, every muscle locked, eyes fixed. Pupils dilated to swallow the iris, the kind of stillness that says, very clearly, in a language that predates language itself, I see you. I am not moving, please don't eat me. Patch looked at the attaché, his tail wagged once, a slow, easy sweep, the kind he gives to the mailman, and to squirrels, and to anyone who registers as not a threat, not a sheep, possibly interesting. Then he looked back at me, because I was the only thing in any room that Patch ever really cared about. He's friendly, I said. The attaché didn't blink. I'm not sure the Sulani can blink when they're in freeze response. What is it? He's a dog. A dog. A border collie. He herds sheep. Sheep, the attaché repeated, the word clearly meaningless. Livestock, on Earth. He moves them from one place to another, keeps them together. It's his job. The attaché's dark eyes tracked from Patch's face to his paws to his tail, that slow, efficient tail, to his chest to his mouth. The teeth were not visible because Patch's mouth was closed in a relaxed, slightly open pant. But the attaché seemed to be imagining them anyway. Herbivores always imagine the teeth. It is, from Earth, the attaché said, born in Bozeman, Montana. Same town as me. It is a death world organism. He's a farm dog. The attaché looked at me. The attaché looked at Patch. The attaché took one very precise step backward. Not a retreat, exactly. A classification of comfortable distance. Welcome to Tianmar Station, the attaché said, and left at a walk that was trying very hard not to be a run. I scratched Patch behind his notched ear. Good start, I said. Okonkwo met me in the human delegation's quarters on level 4. He was younger than I expected, athletic, well-dressed, with the kind of careful posture that said he'd practiced being in rooms with important people, and hadn't yet learned that the important people are usually the ones who stop practicing. He shook my hand firmly. He smiled. I tried not to wince. Mr. Mercer, thank you for coming on such short notice. Cal, and this is. He looked down at Patch, who was sitting at my feet with his chin up, studying Okonkwo the way he studied everything, calmly, completely, filing it away in whatever mental catalog border collies keep behind those bicolored eyes. Patch. Right? There was some discussion about whether a live animal was appropriate in a diplomatic environment. The Solani raised concerns. The Thikri delegation actually filed a formal query about Earth predator protocols. What was the conclusion? Okonkwo hesitated. The conclusion was that you refused to come without him, and we needed you more than we needed to win that argument. Smart conclusion. He briefed me over coffee, real coffee, which was a minor miracle on a neutral station. The summit structure was standard. Plenary sessions in the main chamber, with breakout rooms for bilateral negotiations. 14 delegations, each with between 3 and 12 members. The two principals, the Orith Dominion and the Solani Compact, occupied opposite ends of the chamber. The 12 observer states ranged along the sides in an arrangement that had taken someone 40 hours to finalize, because seating position is status, and status is everything. Earth, as mediator, sat at the head. The Orith are the problem, Okonkwo said, pulling up a dossier on his tablet. Predator species, high gravity origin, dense musculature. They evolved on a volcanic world with an atmospheric oxygen content about 60% of Earth's, which means they're used to working hard for every breath. It makes them patient in some ways and incredibly explosive in others. I knew the Orith, not personally, but the way you know any species you've studied for 2 decades, from reports, from case studies, from the handful of joint exercises I'd participated in during my service. They were, by galactic standards, the closest thing to a death worlder that wasn't from Earth. Close, but not close enough. There's a reason the galactic taxonomy puts humans in a category of our own, and the Orith in the next one down. We evolved on a world that was trying to kill us in more ways simultaneously. The Orith's world was hostile. Ours was creative about it. The Orith delegation was led by a commander named Sorvon, a career military officer who had made his name in border enforcement operations and lost it at a place called the Katheni border, and then spent a decade earning it back through sheer grinding will. He was here because the Orth Dominion didn't send diplomats to disputed summits. They sent commanders. The message was clear. We negotiate from strength, or we don't negotiate at all. Sorvin has rejected the preliminary framework twice, Okonkwo told me. He wants unrestricted access to the Vetha expanse, full territorial claim, no shared corridors, no joint patrol agreements. The Sulani won't agree to that. It's their border too. We're stuck. What about the observers? Mixed. The Thekri and the Banosh are neutral, but leaning Sulani. They have trade routes through the corridor that an Orith blockade would strangle. The Dreven want stability and will back whoever gives it to them. The Pelikari are watching to see who wins so they can align afterward. The rest are furniture. And us? We need this to work, Cal. If the summit fails, we lose credibility as a mediator power. Vasquez spent 6 months building this. If it collapses on our watch. I know. So what's our approach? I sipped my coffee. Patch was lying under the table, chin on my boot. I could feel his breathing. Slow, steady, unconcerned. We let them talk, I said. That's always the approach. We let them talk until they're tired of talking. And then we see what the room looks like when the posturing runs out of fuel. Okonkwo looked like he wanted something more strategic than that. Something with bullet points and contingency plans and a decision tree. He didn't get it. Decision trees are for people who think diplomacy is a process. It's not. It's weather. You watch it and you respond, and sometimes you bring an umbrella, but you don't plan the rain. The first plenary session convened at 9 Herd Station time. The chamber was circular, a deliberate choice, so no delegation sat below another. The ceiling was high, the lighting neutral and evenly distributed, the furniture custom-fitted for each species' anatomy. The Orith delegation sat in reinforced chairs designed for their weight and high-gravity frame, low, wide, with armrests that could support a casual lean of 300 pounds. The Solani sat in elevated seats that accommodated their long limbs, raised slightly so their eye line met the Orith's despite the height difference. The human seats were standard issue, which is to say, slightly uncomfortable in a way that no amount of ergonomic design can fix. I sat at the mediator's table beside Okonkwo. Patch lay beside my chair, on the floor, on a thin blanket I'd brought from home, the same blanket he'd slept on for 7 years, washed enough times that it was more a suggestion of a blanket than an actual one. He had his chin on his paws and his one blue eye open, watching the room the way border collies watch everything. Not aggressively, not nervously, but with total unhurried attention. Like the room was a flock, and he was deciding where each member belonged. The delegates noticed him. Every single one. I'd anticipated interest from the Sulani, herbivore species, instinctive prey response, predictable. What I hadn't anticipated was the Thekri. The Thekri are an insectoid species, tall, angular, with chitinous exoskeletons in shades of deep amber and black. They communicate through a combination of vocalization and rapid mandible movement, and they have compound eyes that process visual information faster than any mammalian species on record. They see everything, every twitch, every shift, every microscopic change in posture. It's what makes them excellent traders and terrible poker players. The Thekri delegate, a senior trade envoy named Keth Solis, entered the chamber, saw Patch, and stopped dead, not in fear, in fascination. Keth Solis approached our table. Her compound eyes covered Patch in what I can only describe as a visual audit, tracking his breathing rate, his muscle tension, his paw position, the angle of his ears, the slow movement of his tail. She processed all of it in about 2 seconds. This organism, she said, her mandibles clicking in precise rhythm, it is a Canis lupus familiaris, earth canid, domesticated variant. Yes, I said. Subspecies, herding lineage, bred for sustained eye contact with large ungulates, low aggression signaling, positional intelligence, the ability to manipulate group movement through physical placement rather than threat display. I stared at her. You have data on earth dogs? The Thekri Xenobiological Archive maintains files on every domesticated species from every known world. The Earth Canid file is, her mandibles worked for a moment, extensive. Your species has produced more variation in a single companion species than most civilizations produce across their entire biosphere. We've had a lot of time, 15,000 standard years, give or take. Keth Solis looked at Patch. Patch looked at Keth Solis. His tail wagged once, that same slow sweep. He was not alarmed by an insectoid alien standing over him clicking mandibles. He was not alarmed by anything. Remarkable, Keth Solis said. The adrenal profile is completely flat, no stress indicators, no defensive posture. This animal is in a room with 14 apex predator or high-threat index species and its autonomic response is indistinguishable from rest. He's a farm dog, I said. He's seen worse than this. Keth Solus's mandible stopped clicking. I think that was the Thickery equivalent of a dropped jaw. What? She said carefully. Does a farm dog consider worse than this? Sheep shearing day. 80 ewes who don't want haircuts. She processed this for a long moment. Then she returned to her seat. I saw her typing rapidly on a handheld, updating the Theckery Xenobiological Archive, presumably. The Orth noticed Patch differently. Sorvan, broad, heavy, with a scar that ran from his jaw to the ridge above his left eye, stared at Patch for a full minute before the session began. His deep-set eyes narrowed. His nostrils flared. The Orth have a much more developed olfactory sense than humans. And what Sorvan was smelling, I realized was the most dangerous thing about a quiet dog. The complete absence of fear pheromones. Every prey animal in the room was generating some level of stress chemistry. The Solani, the Banach, even the Pelicari, who are technically omnivores. Their bodies couldn't help it. 14 species in a closed room, some of them built to kill the others, and biology was doing what biology does. But Patch produced nothing. No cortisol spike, no adrenaline edge. He lay on his blanket and breathed, and the air around him was clean. To a predator like Sorvan, that registered. Not as weakness. Weakness would have triggered hunting instinct. As authority. As the signature of an organism so absolutely secure in its position that the concept of threat simply did not apply. Mediator, Sorvan said, his voice low and rough like gravel in a drum. What is that animal? Okonkwo glanced at me. I nodded. He's a dog, I said. An Earth companion animal. He's with me. A companion. Sorvan's lip curled. Not quite a sneer, but close. Humans bring their domesticated herd animals to diplomatic summits. He's not a herd animal. He's a herding animal. There's a difference. And the difference? A herd animal is the sheep. A herding animal is what tells the sheep where to go. Something shifted in Sorvan's face. Not much. A millimeter of expression, change that most species wouldn't have noticed. But I'd been reading Alien Faces for 22 years, and I saw it reassessment. The mental recategorization of a data point from irrelevant to unclear. He looked at Patch. Patch looked at Sorvan. That border collie focus, the one that sheep ranchers know, the one that makes a 1,200-pound ram reconsider its trajectory, settled on the Orth commander like sunlight through a lens. Sorvan didn't look away, I'll give him that. Most beings do, the first time a border collie really looks at them. It's not aggression, it's not challenge, it's something worse, comprehension. The dog sees you, all of you, and it is completely unimpressed. After a moment, Sorvan sat back in his chair. He didn't ask about the dog again. The first session was procedural, opening statements. Each delegation read its position into the record. The Orth stated their claim to unrestricted access. The Sulani stated their objection. The 12 observers stated variations of, we hope for a peaceful resolution, which is diplomat speak for we're here to see who blinks first. Okonkwo managed the room well, better than I'd expected. He kept the statements on schedule, prevented interruptions, and navigated the protocol differences between species without triggering any cultural alarms. He only smiled twice, and both times were appropriate. But I could see it. The thing that no amount of protocol training prepares you for. The temperature in the room. I don't mean the actual temperature. Although the Orth delegation's body heat had raised the ambient reading by half a degree, I mean the emotional temperature, the invisible pressure that builds when two sides enter a room, convinced that the other side is wrong, and that being right entitles them to take what they want. The Orth were angry, not the hot, explosive anger that burns out quickly and leaves everyone embarrassed. The cold kind, the patient kind. The kind that shows up with a plan and works the plan and doesn't deviate until the plan is done or everyone else is. The Solani were afraid. They hid it well. Their lead negotiator, a tall, composed individual named Alessi, spoke with measured precision and kept her aide Sir calm through what I recognized as a rehearsed calming protocol, tapping her long fingers on the desk in a rhythm that I later learned was the Solani equivalent of, steady, steady, we are together. But fear was there, underneath, in the way their aides wouldn't look at the Orth side of the room. And the observers were calculating, each one running the same equation. If this collapses, which side do I want to be behind? Patch felt it too. I know because his breathing changed, just slightly, a marginally deeper inhale, the way he does when the weather is about to turn on the ranch. Not the thunderstorm is here change, the one before that. The pressure drop change, the one that means something is coming and I'm paying attention, and I'll be right here when it arrives. The session ended at noon. Nothing accomplished, nothing lost. Standard first day outcome. I took Patch for a walk around the habitat ring. The station's outer ring had an observation corridor, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the stars. It was beautiful in the empty absolute way that space is beautiful. No movement, no sound. Just the slow rotation of the station, creating a creeping panorama of distant light. Patch walked beside me, his lead loose, his nose working. There wasn't much to smell, recycled air doesn't carry many stories, but he tried anyway. It's what dogs do. They read the world through their noses, the way humans read it through their eyes. And even when the world is scrubbed clean, they look for the narrative underneath. We passed a group of Banach delegates, a small species, roughly humanoid, with thick gray fur and wide-set eyes. They gave Patch a wide berth and watched him pass with expressions I recognized from years of fieldwork. The specific mix of terror and awe that Earth animals consistently generate in herbivore-descended species. One of the Banach, a young aide, barely past adolescence, whispered something to her superior. I caught the translation through my earpiece. Is it true that the Deathworlders bond with these things from birth? Some do, the superior whispered back. The bond is biochemical. Mutual hormone exchange. The human and the animal develop synchronized stress responses. Their heartbeats align. That's terrifying. That's Earth. I pretended not to hear. Patch pretended not to be terrifying. We kept walking. We were passing a junction near the Orth delegation's quarters when we met Kevra. She was younger than Sorvon, smaller, leaner, with the same dense hide but lighter in color, almost olive. She wore the uniform of a junior officer, pressed, precise, with a single campaign badge on the collar that I later learned, marked her as a veteran of the Vetha Expanse patrol circuit. She was alone, sitting on a bench near the observation window, looking out at the stars with an expression that, in a human, I would have called exhaustion, not physical exhaustion. The other kind. The kind that comes from holding your shape in a room full of pressure and knowing you'll have to do it again tomorrow. She saw Patch before she saw me. And her reaction was different from Sorvin's. She didn't sneer, she didn't tense. She went still, but it was a different kind of still. Curious, focused. The way a hunter goes still when it sees something it recognizes, but has never encountered in this particular configuration. Patch, for his part, looked at her. Then he did something he almost never does with strangers. He walked toward her, not fast, not eager, that slow, measured border collie approach, head low, eyes up, weight distributed evenly, each paw placed with deliberate care. The approach that says, I am coming to you. I am not a threat. I am also not afraid. I am not asking permission. I am simply arriving. The Orth officer didn't move. She watched Patch cross the corridor toward her, and when he reached the bench, he sat down beside her legs and looked up at her face. She looked down at him, her hand, heavy, thick-fingered, with short, blunt claws that had been filed smooth for shipboard duty, hovered above his head. He won't bite, I said. I know, she said. Her voice was quieter than Sorvon's, younger, less armored. I can feel it. There is no word in your language. In ours, we call it Tevrani. The settled wait. When a predator has nothing left to prove. She placed her hand on Patch's head. He didn't flinch. She ran her fingers through the fur behind his ears, gently, carefully, as if she were handling something ancient and irreplaceable. What is his rank? She asked. He doesn't have a rank. He's a pet. She looked at me. A Deathworld apex companion with no rank. He's a farm dog. On Earth, yes. Earth, she said. Where the apex predators keep the other apex predators as companions. Where the dominant species, a species that hunted everything on its world to submission, including the climate itself, voluntarily sleeps beside another predator. Unarmored, eyes closed. I didn't have an answer for that. It wasn't a question. She scratched Patch behind his ear, the notched one. He leaned into it. His tail swept the floor once. That slow, satisfied sweep. My name is Kevra, she said. I am Commander Sorvin's adjutant. Cal Mercer, cultural liaison. She looked at Patch again, and the animal is your cultural contribution? He's my dog. He is more than a dog, Mr. Mercer. But I think you know that. She stood, nodded once, a precise military nod, and walked back toward the Orth quarters. Patch watched her go with his head tilted slightly. Then he looked at me. Yeah, I said, I know. The summit's second day went worse than the first. The Orth opened with a revised territorial demand that expanded their claim by 15%. Not just the expanse, but a buffer zone extending into the Kale Traverse itself. It was an overreach, and everyone in the room knew it, including the Orth. It was a negotiating tactic. Ask for more than you want so that compromising back to your original demand feels like a concession. Except the Sulani didn't read it as a tactic. They read it as an escalation, unless he stood. She spoke 3 sentences in a voice like cracking ice. Formal, precise, each word carrying the weight of 8 million years of prey animal evolution, saying we know when we are being hunted. She bowed to the mediator's table, a courtesy so crisp it was almost an insult, and walked out. Half the observers followed. The chamber emptied in 90 seconds. Okonkwo looked at me. His smile was threatening to appear. Don't smile, I said. I'm not smiling. You're about to. He pressed his lips together. What do we do? We wait. Alessi didn't leave the station. She left the room. That's different. It looked the same. Everything looks the same from the wrong angle. She left her data pads on the table. See? Her aides took theirs. She left hers. That means she's coming back. She just needs to not be in the same room as the word buffer zone for a few hours. Okonkwo looked at the data pads. He looked at me. He closed his mouth. Patch was lying on his blanket. He hadn't moved during the walkout. He was watching the empty seats the way he watched a gate that had just been opened, noting the movement, understanding the pattern, waiting patiently for the flock to come back through. I went to find Alessi. She was in the Sulani breakout room, surrounded by her aides. They were all talking at once in that rapid, layered Sulani harmonic that sounds like wind through tall grass. Multiple tones overlapping. A conversational method evolved for open plains where sound needed to carry across distance and still be intelligible. When I entered, they went silent. 6 pairs of dark, reflective eyes turned toward me. Negotiator Alessi, I said. May I sit? She regarded me with those large, dark eyes, the human liaison. With the animal. He's outside. I left him with Okonkwo. I am aware of where your animal is. I can feel his heartbeat through the floor. She paused. It is very slow. He's resting. In the middle of a diplomatic crisis, your animal rests. Border collies are efficient. They rest when there's nothing to herd. When the flock comes back, he'll be ready. Something flickered in her expressions. Interest, maybe. Or recognition. The herbivore part of her brain catching something familiar in the metaphor. Your commander Sorvin, she said, has expanded his demands. You are aware of this. I am. Then you are aware that we cannot accept them. The Vitha expanse is a shared corridor. The buffer zone proposal would effectively cede. Negotiator. I held up my hand, gently. Not a stop gesture, just a pause. I know the positions. I read the briefings on the way out here. 9 days of transit, not much else to do. What I don't know is what Sorvan actually wants. She blinked. He wants the expanse. That's what he's asking for. What does he want? Silence. The aides looked at each other. Alessi looked at me. I do not understand the distinction, she said. In my experience, 22 years of this, 14 species. More summits than I can count. The thing a predator asks for and the thing it wants are rarely the same. A predator asks for territory because territory means security. It asks for a buffer zone because a buffer zone means distance between itself and the thing it's afraid of. It doesn't want the land. It wants to stop being afraid. Alessi was very still. The Solani stillness, prey animal stillness, but different. Not the freeze response I'd seen in the corridor. Thoughtful, analytical, the stillness of a mind working. You believe Sorvin is afraid? She said. I believe the Orth Dominion's border has been probed by unmarked vessels 6 times in the last year. I read the intelligence summaries. I believe their colony at Vetha Station reported an unidentified weapons signature 2 months ago that was never resolved. And I believe that Sorvan was personally present when the Orth lost a border skirmish to the Kethany block 11 years ago, a loss that cost 217 Orth lives, 3 patrol ships, and a colony station. A loss that cost Sorvan his command rank. He was demoted. It took him 9 years to climb back. The room was very quiet. Outside the door, I could hear Patch shift on his blanket, the quiet sound of a dog adjusting his chin on his paws. He's not here to negotiate for territory, I said. He's here to make sure that what happened at the Kethini border never happens again. The territorial demand is the shape of his fear. If you fight the shape, you get nowhere. If you acknowledge the fear, you might get somewhere. Alessi sat with that for a long time. Her aides didn't speak. The harmonics were silent. What do you suggest? Alessi asked. Come back to the table. Don't accept the revised demand. Don't counter with your own. Instead, ask Sorvan one question. What question? Ask him what happened at the Ketheni border. She stared at me. That is a deeply personal in Sulani protocol. Invoking a military defeat is. I know what it is in Sulani protocol. I'm asking you what it would be in Orth protocol. She paused. In Orth culture, a direct question about a personal defeat is an acknowledgement of the cost, of the experience. It is considered, she searched for the word respectful. It's more than that. For the Orth, being asked means someone sees the wound. And a wound that's been seen can be treated. One that nobody mentions just festers. She was quiet for another long moment. Then she looked at the table, at her aides, at the door behind which Patch was sleeping. The room adjusted. She said softly, almost to herself. Excuse me? Nothing. I will return to the table. The third session convened in the afternoon. All 14 delegations present. Alessi had returned. The observers had followed. Alessi's data pads were still where she'd left them. She picked them up, sat down, and smoothed the front of her robe with the precise, unhurried movements of someone who has made a decision and is at peace with it, Sorvin noticed. His heavy brow lowered, the scar pulling tight. He was expecting a countermand, a rejection, a drawn line. He was ready for opposition. He was built for opposition. Every Makyawul of his evolution, every year of military training, every hour of the Kethany aftermath had prepared him for the moment when the other side pushes back and you push harder. What he was not prepared for was Alessi's question. She stood. She spoke calmly. She addressed Commander Sorvan directly, by name, by rank, with the full formal honorific that the Solani reserve for acknowledged warriors. And she asked, in front of 14 delegations and their combined staffs and aides and security details, what had happened to Commander Sorvan at the Kethany border. The chamber went absolutely silent. I could hear the station's life support hum. I could hear the Banosh aide breathing through her nose. I could hear Patch's tail brush the floor, once, as he shifted on his blanket. Sorvin's face changed. It was like watching geology. Slow, fundamental, irreversible. The anger was still there. The hard surface that had carried him through 11 years of rebuilding. But under it, something else surfaced. Something old and heavy that he'd been carrying alone. He didn't answer, not immediately. He sat in his reinforced chair, his heavy hands flat on the table, and he breathed. The Orth breathe loudly when they're processing emotion. It's involuntary, a function of their high-density respiratory system, and the sound filled the chamber like slow wind through a canyon. In, out. Patch lifted his head. I felt it too, the shift in the room, the temperature dropping. Not the climate control, something else entirely. The emotional register of the space changing as 14 species watched a military commander confront a question he'd been running from for a decade. We lost the Kethany border in 6 hours, Sorvan said. His voice was different, lower, rougher, stripped of its command cadence, its rhetorical armor, all the careful muscle that military officers wrap around their words. This was the voice underneath. 6 hours, 11 ships, 217 crew. I was executive officer on the lead vessel. The Kethany fleet came through the passage at 0340. We detected them late. They'd masked their approach through an asteroid field. By the time our sensors resolved the contacts, they were inside our formation. He paused. The room didn't breathe. I watched the captain die on the bridge. Shrapnel. He was giving an order. He didn't finish it. I took command. I was 29 years old. I had been in 3 engagements, none of them larger than a skirmish. I ordered the retreat. Another pause. There was no retreat, he said. There was a rout. We ran. Our drives were damaged. We lost ships on the withdrawal, 2 more, with full crews, and behind us, everything we had defended, the station, the civilians, the families of every officer in the fleet, was gone. The Kethany burned it, all of it. The silence was total. Even the station's life support seemed to be holding its breath. I swore, Sorvan said, that I would never allow that to happen again. To any Orth border, to any Orth lives, to any 29-year-old officer standing on a bridge, watching his world come apart because someone, somewhere, failed to secure a corridor. He looked at Ellisy. His eyes were dry. The Orth don't cry. Their physiology doesn't produce tears. But the dryness in those deep-set eyes was somehow worse. Like looking at cracked earth in a drought. If securing this corridor requires that the Dominion claim it fully, then that is the price. I will pay it. I will pay anything. Because I have already paid more than you can imagine, and I will not pay it again. He sat back. That is what happened at the Kethany border. Negotiator, does that satisfy your question? The room was on a knife's edge. I could feel it, the way you can feel a thunderstorm 20 minutes before the first drop. Alessi had done what I'd asked. She'd opened the wound. But open wounds can heal, or they can bleed out. The next 30 seconds would determine which. Alessi stood. She was tall, even for a Solani, nearly 7 feet. Her silver skin catching the neutral light. She spoke slowly, each word deliberate. Commander Sorvan. The Solani Compact lost the HFY colony to a plague of engineered pathogens 32 years ago. We lost 14,000 people. Not to war, to a biological agent that someone released from an unmarked vessel, and no one ever claimed responsibility for. I was not born yet. But my mother was there. She was a teacher at the colony school. She survived. Barely. She lost her students. All of them. Sorvan was listening. The anger in his face had softened, not disappeared but shifted, like a river finding a new channel. We are here, Alessi said, because both of our peoples are afraid, and afraid peoples do terrible things when they believe they are alone in their fear. She sat down. The chamber held its breath. 14 delegations, hundreds of individuals from a dozen worlds, and in the center of that silence, the low, steady sound of Patch breathing on his blanket beside my chair, slow, even, absolutely calm. Sorvan looked at me. Then he looked at Patch, the dog lying there with his chin on his paws, one eye open, watching. The calmest thing in a room full of sharp edges. Then he looked back at Alessi. I am prepared, Sorvin said slowly, to discuss shared transit protocols. It was the first time in 11 months that either side had moved. Okonkwo, beside me, exhaled. I don't think he'd breathed for 2 minutes. Patch put his head back down and closed his eyes. What followed was 4 days of the hardest kind of diplomacy. The kind that looks boring from the outside: bilateral meetings, drafting sessions, technical committees on transit routing, sensor placement, patrol coordination, emergency response protocols. The Orith and the Solani sat across from each other for hours, parsing language, arguing details, finding the thousand small compromises that add up to a framework neither side loves but both can live with. I sat in on most of the sessions. My job was to watch for cultural tripwires, the moments when a phrase or a gesture meant something different to one side than to the other. 22 years of this work had given me a library of those moments, and they're always smaller than you expect. The Orith fist to chest that means, I acknowledge your point, but reads to herbivore species as an aggression display. The Solani silence that means I am considering your proposal, but reads to predator species as contempt or refusal. The human nod that means yes in our culture but means I heard you in about 6 others, which has caused more diplomatic incidents than I care to remember. Patch attended every session. This was not by design. It was simply that Patch went where I went, and I went to the sessions, and therefore Patch was at the sessions. He lay on his blanket. He slept. He occasionally lifted his head to watch someone, usually whoever was speaking loudest, then put it back down. He was the least active participant in every room he entered. And he was also, I came to realize, the most important. I noticed it on the second day of framework negotiations. The Orith delegation, when they entered a room where Patch was already lying, moved differently. They were quieter, their voices were lower, their body language, the squared shoulders, the heavy footfalls, the direct stares that were standard Orith assertion behavior, softened, not dramatically, not in a way that would register on a behavioral scan, but enough that the Solani noticed. On the third day, Alessi's chief aide, a composed, careful woman named Tessic, approached me during a recess. Mr. Mercer, a question. Go ahead. Could your animal be present for our next bilateral with the Orith? The session on patrol coordination? He's always present. I know. But could he be positioned closer to the center of the room? Between the tables, perhaps. I looked at her. Why? She hesitated. He seems to settle them. When the commander is near your animal, his cortisol indicators drop. Our medical aid monitors these things. Standard Sulani precaution when negotiating with predator species. In the commander's presence, the animal reduces his aggression markers by approximately 19%. 19%. It is significant. We are calmer when they are calmer. It is a cascade. A cascade. The animal calms the predator. The calmer predator calms the prey. The calmer prey makes better decisions. This is, in our evolutionary biology, this is the function of an ecosystem's apex regulator, the organism at the top that sets the emotional tone for everything below it. I looked at Patch, who was sleeping with his tongue slightly out. He's a farm dog, I said. He is an apex regulator, Tessic said. And I say that with the full weight of Solani xenobiological assessment behind it. From that point on, Patch's blanket was positioned at the exact center of every bilateral session. Nobody questioned it. Nobody objected. The Orith and the Sulani both, independently and without coordinating, accepted the presence of a 38-pound border collie as the emotional anchor of their negotiations. I thought about telling Patch, but he was asleep, and he wouldn't have cared anyway. On the 4th day of framework negotiations, it almost fell apart again. A technical disagreement over sensor placement at a specific navigation point, waypoint KL7, a critical junction where the 2 transit corridors intersected. The Orith wanted their sensors 30 degrees to starboard, giving them line of sight to the Cathini approach vector. The Solani wanted them at the midpoint, a neutral position that didn't privilege either side's threat assessment. Neither would move. The argument escalated. Sorvan stood. His voice rose, not shouting, not yet, but the Orith pre-escalation register, a deepening of tone that signals I am approaching my limit. The Solani delegation's aides pushed back their chairs, the involuntary prey-animal distancing response, creating space between themselves and the sound that registered in their evolutionary memory as an approaching predator. Okonkwo looked at me. I shook my head slightly. Wait, and then Patch stood up. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He didn't even look at either delegation. He stood up from his blanket, walked to the center of the room, the exact geographic center, between the 2 tables, between the 2 species, between the two fears and lay down again, chin on paws. One blue eye open, one brown eye closed, tail flat, breathing slow. The room stopped. It just stopped, like someone had hit a pause button on the entire diplomatic process. Sorvan, standing mid-sentence, looked down at the dog. Alessi, seated, looked at the dog. The aides, the officers, the observers, everyone looked at the dog who had walked to the center of the room and lain down, as if the fate of the corridor was less important than finding the right spot for a nap. And then Sorvan looked at the dog more carefully. I could see him processing it. The Orth predator brain, the hunter's mind, reading the dog's position, center of the territory, equidistant from both sides, low posture, not submission, but occupation. The dog had claimed the middle ground, and the gaze, that border collie gaze, directed not at Sorvan, not at Alessi, but at the space between them, the gap, the unsettled territory. The dog was looking at the problem. Sorvan sat down. The Sulani aides pulled their chairs back to the table. 30-degree offset with Sulani monitoring access, Sorvan said, his voice at normal volume, as if nothing had happened. Is that acceptable? Alessi glanced at me. I said nothing. She looked at Patch. Acceptable, she said. The session continued. Patch stayed in the center of the room for the remainder. Nobody moved his blanket. After the session, Kevra stopped me in the corridor. Your animal, she said. It moved to the center of the room. He does that. Why? He's a herding dog. When the flock scatters, his instinct is to go to the center and hold the line. He reads the movement of every individual in the group, calculates the balance point, positions himself there, and stays until the flock settles. It's not trained behavior. It's 15,000 years of selection for exactly this, the ability to hold a group together through position and presence. Kevra's olive gray face was very still. He moved 14 delegations. He moved himself. The delegations chose to follow. That's the secret of herding. A good dog never forces anything. The flock moves because the dog makes the right position feel inevitable. That is, she paused, on our world, the most dangerous predators are not the ones that roar. They are the ones that wait. The quiet ones. The ones that never need to chase because everything in the territory already knows where they are and adjusts accordingly. She looked at Patch, who was sitting at my feet, tongue slightly out, watching a maintenance drone hum past on the ceiling. He is the quiet one, she said. He's a good dog, I said. Kevra shook her head, the Orth gesture of deep disagreement, like a human might shake off water. He is more than that, she said, and I think your species knows it. I think that is why you keep them, not as pets, as... The word is not weapon. The word is... She struggled. In our language, the closest is Tevkora, the one who holds the center when the center will not hold. I didn't have a translation for that. I clipped Patch's lead and walked him back to our quarters, and he trotted beside me the way he always does, easy, unhurried, secure in the knowledge that wherever we were going was exactly where he needed to be. Day 6, the framework was nearly complete. Shared transit protocols established, sensor placement agreed, patrol coordination drafted, emergency response procedures finalized. The 12 observer states had signed preliminary endorsements. Everything pointed toward a signing Elsim ceremony on day 7. I should have known it wouldn't be that clean. It never is. At 0300 station time, an alarm went off. I came out of a dead sleep to the sound. High-pitched, oscillating, the Universal Station alert for hull breach protocol. Patch was already on his feet beside the bed, his head lowered, his one blue eye locked on the door. Not frightened, not anxious, alert. The way he looks when he hears a coyote on the ranch at 3 in the morning, not concerned, not aggressive, just ready. I grabbed my clothes, clipped on Patch's lead, and went into the corridor. The station's emergency lighting was active. Red strips along the floor, white spots at intersections. People were moving, station security in tactical gear, delegation staff in various states of dress and alarm. Everyone carrying the particular tension comes from being woken by something loud in a place that's supposed to be safe. I found Okonkwo at the security center. He hadn't slept. His shirt was rumpled, but his eyes were sharp. It's not a hull breach, he told me. His face was tight. Someone triggered the alarm remotely, from inside the station, a maintenance override. It took security 14 minutes to isolate the source and shut it down. Sabotage? Unclear. Could be a system fault. The station's old. This was a mothballed facility before we reactivated it for the summit. But the timing is what matters, I said. Who benefits from the talks falling apart at the 11th hour? Half a dozen groups. The Katheni bloc, obviously. They'd love to see the Orith and Sulani at each other's throats. The Pelikari have a mining consortium that does better when the corridor is disputed. And there are elements within both delegations that... The delegations, I said. Where are they? Being contained in their quarters. Standard security protocol. How are the Orith responding? Okonkwo's face tightened further. They're not. Sorvan isn't answering communications. His delegation has sealed their quarters. Security can't confirm status. The cold knot formed in my chest. The one that means the situation has shifted from inconvenient to dangerous. If the Orth break containment during a security alert, armed, the Solani will interpret it as aggression. The observers will scatter. The framework is dead. I'll go, I said, Cal. I'll go. I know Sorvan. You've known him for 5 days. I've known men like him for 30 years. The Orth delegation's quarters were on level 6, port side. The corridor outside was empty except for 2 station security officers standing at a respectful distance from the door. They were human, mid-20s, low rank, trying very hard to look calm while standing outside a sealed room full of armed Orth warriors. They looked relieved to see me. They won't open, sir, one of them said. We've hailed 3 times. No response. Step back, I said. Give me the corridor. They retreated 20 paces. I walked to the door. Patch walked beside me, his lead loose, his paws quiet on the deck plating. I knocked on the door. Not a security knock. A regular knock, the kind you'd use on a neighbor's door at 3 in the morning when your car alarm won't stop. Commander Sorvan, it's Cal Mercer. Silence, the deep kind. I have Patch with me. A pause, 3 seconds, 4, 5, and then the door opened. Sorvan stood in the doorway. He was fully armed. Not his formal sidearm, the real thing. A heavy-bore energy weapon that the Orth military uses for close-quarters boarding operations. Behind him, his delegation was armed the same way. 6 Orth warriors, including Kevra, her face set, her hands steady on her weapon, armored and ready, in a station where Protocol 14 prohibited weapons in all common areas. They'd had the weapons the whole time, hidden, prepared, because Sorvan was not a man who trusted Protocol 14. The security officers behind me reached for their sidearms. I held up my hand without turning around. Don't, I said, quietly. To the security officers, to Sorvan, to the room. Just don't. Patch walked forward, lead slack, head low. That slow, deliberate border collie walk that covers ground without appearing to hurry, that arrives without seeming to move. He walked past me, past the doorway, and into the Orth delegation's quarters. He walked up to Sorvan. The Orth commander, armed, armored, a combat veteran who had survived the Kethany border and spent 11 years rebuilding his life and his career and his capacity to function without flinching at alarms, looked down at my dog. Patch sat down at his feet. Not mine. His. Sorvan's hand, the one not holding the weapon, dropped to the dog's head. I watched his fingers move through Patch's fur. Heavy fingers. Scarred fingers. The hands of a warrior who had held dying men and given orders he would never forget and rebuilt himself, joint by joint, from the wreckage. Those hands moving through the soft fur of a border collie at 3 in the morning on a space station while an alarm shrieked and the universe balanced on a razor's edge. They triggered the alarm to collapse the talk, Sorvan said. His voice was rough, exposed. I don't know who, but this is what the Kethany did. Before they struck our border, they triggered a station alert. Confusion. Distraction. Scatter the prey. And then they came through the passage and killed everyone I couldn't save. His hand didn't stop moving on Patch's head. I will not be scattered again. I cannot allow my people to be undefended. I know, I said. I understand that. You do not know, Commander. I stepped into the doorway, unarmed, unarmored, nothing but an old man with a bad knee and a dog. I know exactly what it feels like to hear an alarm at Zo 300 and know in your bones, before your brain catches up, that the last time you heard that sound, the people you were responsible for died. I know the shape of that fear. It doesn't get smaller. You just learn to carry it. He looked at me. His deep-set eyes, lit by the red emergency strips, were very old. Older than his years. This isn't the Kethany border, I said. This is a negotiating table. And you are 3 signatures away from making sure no Orth border is ever undefended again. Not through territory, through partnership. Shared patrols. Shared sensors. Shared intelligence. That's what this framework gives you, not a buffer zone. A network, the real kind of security. His hand was still on Patch's head. The dog hadn't moved, hadn't looked away. That steady, certain border collie presence. The settled weight. If you walk out of this station armed, Commander, the summit is over. The Sulani will run. The observers will scatter. And the Orth border will be exactly as vulnerable as it was 11 months ago before any of us came here. And if the alarm is real, if someone has, then I'll be standing right here beside you, and so will Patch. And I promise you, Commander, if something comes through that corridor, the dog will know before either of us does. That's what he was bred for. That's what 15,000 years of partnership between his kind and mine built. Not a weapon, a warning system. The finest early alert system in the natural world. Sorvan looked at Patch. Patch looked at Sorvan. One brown eye, one blue eye, steady and calm and absolutely unimpressed by the weight of the moment. Because Patch didn't know the weight of the moment. He just knew that a frightened man needed to be sat beside, and that was enough. Sorvan lowered the weapon. Tell your security to stand down, he said. My delegation will remain in quarters until the alert is resolved. We will keep our weapons. Fair enough, and the dog stays. I looked at Patch. He was still sitting at Sorvan's feet, looking up at the commander with the benign intensity of a dog who has found a particularly interesting sheep that needs a lot of watching. If he wants to stay, he stays, I said. He's a volunteer. Sorvan almost smiled. The expression looked unfamiliar on his face, like a word in a language he'd once spoken fluently and had forgotten. 15,000 years, he said. Give or take. Your species partnered with predators for 15,000 years. Longer, probably. The molecular evidence keeps pushing it back. The dog came first, Commander. Before agriculture, before pottery, before written language, before cities. The very first thing humans did, when they came down from the trees and looked at the dangerous world around them, was thump the smartest predator on the savannah and say, let's do this together. Sorvan looked at Patch, and this is the result. This is the result. A 9-year-old farm dog with a notched ear who walks into a room full of armed warriors and sits down. He sat at my feet, Mercer. Not in the middle of the room. At my feet. There's a difference. There is. He chose me. He does that sometimes. He's a good judge. Of character? Of need. Sorvan's was quiet for a long moment, his hand still on Patch's head, his weapon lowered, resting against his thigh. Behind him, Kevra quietly safed her own weapon and set it on the table. One by one, the other Orth did the same. Outside, the alarm cut off. Security had found the source. A degraded relay in a secondary environmental system. Not sabotage. Not an attack. Just a station getting old and a circuit getting tired. In the morning, Sorvan said, we sign. In the morning, I agreed. I left Patch with Sorvan that night. I walked back to my quarters alone. The corridor's quiet now, the emergency lighting fading back to standard white. My knee ached, the kind that means you've been standing too long on a bad joint in recycled gravity. I was tired in the way that only this kind of work makes you tired. Not physical exhaustion, but the deep, cellular weariness of holding a situation together with nothing but words and presence, and the belief, tested and retested over decades, that most beings would rather be decent than dangerous if you give them the room. And a dog. A dog who knows when to put down. In the morning, the framework was signed, all 14 delegations. In the main chamber, at 0900, with formal statements and recorded seals and the peculiar anticlimactic gravity of a document that represents 11 months of standoff and 6 days of work compressed into 12 pages of careful language that nobody loves and everybody can accept. Sorvan signed for the Orth Dominion. He did it with his left hand. His right hand was on Patch's head. Nobody commented on this. The observers noted it. The Solani delegation noted it. Keth Solus's mandibles clicked in what I suspected was the Thikri equivalent of I am updating the archive. Okonkwo noted it. The cameras noted it. But nobody said a word because the room understood something that didn't need to be articulated. The commander had found the settled weight, and the settled weight was a dog. Alessi signed for the Solani Compact. As she passed our table, she paused and looked down at Patch, who was lying on his blanket with his chin on his paws. The room adjusted, she said softly. It always does, I said. She smiled. The Sulani smile, not teeth-bearing, not a threat, a thinning of the lips, a brightening of the eyes. A prey animal's smile evolved to signal trust. I believe it does, she said, when the right dog is in the field. After the signing, there was a reception. The diplomatic kind, where everyone stands in a room with drinks they can't actually drink because the biochemistry is wrong, and makes conversation they don't actually mean, because the real work is done, and now they're just being polite about it. It's the part of diplomacy I always hated, the performance of resolution, as if the act of standing in the same room sipping incompatible beverages proves something. I stood near the observation window with a glass of water. Patch sat beside me, watching the room. Delegates from all 14 species moved through the space, talking, gesturing, occasionally glancing at the dog with expressions that ranged from awe to bewilderment to something I can only describe as hunger. Not the predatory kind, but the kind you see in someone who has just realized they're missing something important and doesn't know how to get it. The Thikri envoy, Keth Solus, approached first. Mr. Mercer, I wish to inform you that the Thikri Xenobiological Archive has been updated. The entry for Canis lupus familiaris, Border Collie variant, now includes a subsection on diplomatic applications. I appreciate that. The subsection is titled The Settled Weight Phenomenon. It documents the observed effect of a calm apex companion on multi-species negotiation dynamics. I believe it will be widely cited. Patch will be flattered. Keth Solis looked at Patch. Her compound eyes processed him in their usual 2-second audit. His resting heart rate has not deviated by more than 4 beats per minute across the entire summit, she said. That is unprecedented in our records. He's a calm dog. He is the calmest organism I have observed on a station with 14 apex predator species. That is not calm, Mr. Mercer. That is dominance expressed as rest. She nodded her angular head and returned to the reception. I looked at Patch. He looked at me. Dominance expressed as rest, I said. He yawned. Kevra found me after the Thekri left. Mr. Mercer. She stood beside me, looking out at the stars. The same observation window where she'd first met Patch 6 days ago. The same stars. The commander has asked me to convey a formal request. Oh? The Orith Dominion wishes to establish a cultural exchange program with Earth. Specifically, and I am quoting the commander directly, we wish to understand the practice of companion animal partnership, its history, its methodology, and its implications for interspecies diplomacy. I looked at her. Sorvin wants to study dogs. Sorvin wants to understand why a 9-year-old farm animal with a notched ear and no rank can do what 14 armed delegations and 6 months of diplomatic groundwork could not. And what did it do? It held the center, Mr. Mercer, when nothing else could. I didn't have an answer for that. Not a simple one. Not that fits in a formal diplomatic response. Because the truth is complicated and old and wrapped up in 15,000 years of 2 species figuring out how to trust each other, and trust is the one thing you can't explain. You can only demonstrate it. You can only lie down in the middle of the room and breathe. Tell the commander he's welcome to visit my ranch in Bozeman anytime, I said. I'll introduce him to the sheep. Kevra stared at me, then she laughed. A short, surprised sound, like a bark. The first time I'd heard an Orith laugh. I will convey the message, she said. We left Tianmar Station on day 9. Conquo stayed behind to manage the follow-up committees, the tedious but necessary work of turning a framework into a treaty. He shook my hand at the airlock. Cal, thank you. You did the work. I just watched. You did more than watch. He looked at Patch. Both of you. He did more than me. I just opened doors. He walked through them. Okenso smiled. For once, it was the right call. At the airlock, a Solani officer stopped me. Mr. Mercer. Negotiator, Alessi asked me to give you this. The officer held out a small object, a crystalline disc, pale blue, engraved with flowing Solani script that caught the light like water. What is it? It is a sentinel designation marker. In our culture, it is given to a sentinel, one who guards the herd without being asked, without authority, without rank, who stands where the danger is and does not move. It is the highest civilian honor the compact bestows. I turned the disc over in my hands. It was warm. Something in the crystal held heat, like a stone in sunlight. It is not for you, the officer said carefully. It is for the animal. I looked at Patch. He was sitting in the airlock, waiting patiently, his lead loose, his tail moving in a slow sweep across the deck plating. His tongue was slightly out. His one blue eye was watching a cargo drone navigate the docking bay. I'll make sure he gets it, I said. The officer hesitated. Mr. Mercer, a question if I may. Go ahead. Does the animal understand what he did? I thought about that. Longer than the officer probably expected, because the answer matters, and I wanted to get it right. No, I said finally. He doesn't understand diplomacy. He doesn't understand territorial disputes or shared transit protocols, or the history of the Cathini border. He doesn't know what a framework is or why it matters or what it cost. He's a dog. He understands 3 things. Where I am, where the flock is, and whether the flock is settled. And the flock was not settled. No. So he settled it. That's what border collies do. That's all they've ever done. They walk to the center, they lie down, and they wait for the flock to figure it out. The officer looked at Patch. Patch looked at the officer. One brown eye, one blue eye, steady and calm and absolutely unimpressed by the weight of what he had accomplished, because he had not accomplished anything. Not really. Not in any way that he could understand. He had walked to the center of a room. He had sat at the feet of a frightened man. He had lain on a blanket and breathed. Remarkable, the officer said. He's a good dog, I said. We flew back to Earth on a Wednesday. Standard courier, small, fast, built for personnel transfer, not comfort. It had a bunk for me and a spot on the floor for Patch, and a viewport that showed the stars going by like slow rain. Somewhere past the Kale Traverse, I clipped the Solani Sentinel disc to Patch's collar. It hung there next to his rabies tag and the faded brass tag from the Bozeman Veterinary Clinic that reads Patch Mercer, 406-555-0178. 3 tags. One from a vet in Montana, one from a galactic superpower, and one that says his shots are current. He didn't notice. He was asleep, chin on my boot, breathing the slow, deep, even breaths of a dog who has done his work and doesn't know it, and is resting. I sat on the bunk and watched him sleep and thought about Sorvon, sitting in his reinforced chair with his hand on Patch's head, saying, "He chose me." I thought about Alessi watching the dog lie down in the center of the room and whispering, "The room adjusted." I thought about Kevra, who had touched a dog's ears and felt the settled weight of something she had no word for in her own language and had to borrow one from ours. I thought about Keth Solis, updating her archive, filing patch under diplomatic applications as if he could be cataloged, as if any of it could be cataloged. And I thought about the question the Solani officer had asked, does the animal understand what he did? No, he doesn't. He walked into rooms and lay down. He sat at the feet of a frightened warrior. He moved to the center of a scattered flock and held the line. He did what border collies have always done, not because he understood the stakes, not because someone trained him for interstellar diplomacy, not because he had any concept of the Vetha expanse or the Catheni border or the 11 months of frozen channels that had brought 14 civilizations to the edge of war. He did it because it was in him, in his bones, in the ancient, unbroken contract between his kind and mine, forged on a savanna somewhere before we had words for it, before we had cities or ships or the ability to reach the stars. Somewhere, 15,000 years ago, a wolf walked toward a fire, and a human didn't throw a rock, and everything that followed, everything, including a dog lying on a blanket in a diplomatic chamber while the galaxy held its breath, came from that one moment of mutual trust. That's what they don't understand. The Orith, the Solani, the Thekri, with their archives and their compound eyes, they see the calm, and they call it dominance. They see the position, and they call it strategy. They see the effect, and they look for the mechanism. But there is no mechanism. There's just a dog and a human, and the thing between them that nobody has ever been able to name, because it's older than names. We landed in Bozeman on a Saturday morning. The sun was coming up over the Bridger Range, painting the peaks in shades of gold and copper. The air smelled like pine and cold water, and the first cut of hay from my brother's field. Real air, the kind that carries stories. I drove home with the windows down. Patch rode in the passenger seat with his nose in the wind, his one blue eye squinting against the light. His tail thumped against the seat when we turned onto the gravel road. He knew this road. He knew it the way he knew my voice, and the sound of his food bowl and the creak of the porch step. Home. I parked in the gravel drive. The house was the same. Small, clean, the porch sagging a little on the left side where I keep meaning to shore up the post and never do. The mountains were the same. The sky was the same. Patch jumped out of the truck and trotted to the porch. He sniffed the railing. He checked the water bowl. He walked a slow circle on the old blanket I keep by the door. 3 turns, the way he always does. Some ancient wolf instinct flattening the grass that hasn't been grass for 1,000 generations, and lay down, chin on his paws, one eye open. I sat down in the porch chair and looked out at the mountains. My knee ached. The sun was warm. In the distance, I could hear my brother's tractor starting up in the lower field. Patch sighed. That deep, contented exhalation that dogs do when they've found the exact right spot and the exact right temperature, and the world is, for this moment, exactly as it should be. The crystalline disc on his collar caught the morning light, throwing a tiny prism onto the porch boards. 14 delegations came armed to that summit. They brought warships and weapons and centuries of fear. They brought the finest military and diplomatic minds their civilizations could produce. They brought everything they had. And I brought my dog. He's sleeping now, chin on his paws on the porch in Montana in the morning light. One ear cocked for the sound of the tractor, because later he'll want to go down to the field and watch the work, and maybe, if the sheep are out, he'll walk among them. Quiet, steady, certain, and they'll drift together without knowing why. Because that's what a flock does when the right dog is in the field. That's all he does. He walks into the room and lies down, and the room decides to be better. 15,000 years, and we still don't have a word for it. Tevrani, the Orith called it. The settled weight, I just call it patch.